5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
A shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I am no average Joe. Be with me, and you will see more than you ever wanted to.
Hey there, guys. This is Dr. John Baranchuk coming at you with a pre-recorded show because I'm making a movie. So I'm doing this show right after our last Melba Ketchum show. Thanks for all in attendance. It looks like a pretty good conversation got going in the chat. That means I'm stimulating some thinking, maybe even some learning, and that's why we're here. So I was very happy with that show. Today I'm going to kind of get more basic, go another tutorial, if you will. I guess you could call it a tutorial. And I'm going to be just going over some critical definitions by alphabet. Just to throw a wrinkle into the mess. We'll start with the A's and work our way down gradually. No rules about interacting. You're not here. Please do subscribe to my channel and encourage other people to subscribe and view. That's how we make the wheels move forward. Please always feel free to make comments to me on my Facebook if you'd like after a show, if you had any questions or wanted some further clarification. If I can, I'll be happy to chat with you. Other than that, we're going to get going with some ABCs of science. Just to get this sucker all in, I'm going to forego the story today. There are very few science stories out there, and I think when I did my show on the scientific model, the research model, the scientific method. Thank you. I read one, but I think I'm just going to jump in without any story. Maybe some stories will come to me as I go. Actually, that just made me think of something. So I think the bottom line on scientific stories is that it requires people to do scientific research. And, I can't wait to meet the other players and the other people featured in Legend Meets Science 2. Because certainly when I look on the internet, Facebook, it's about all I do. I keep forgetting to put a show up on whatever that other one is, Instagram maybe, or X. But no one's talking science. I think we got people talking research, the research that they've come to know in the Bigfoot community, going out on expeditions, logging in Bigfoot phenomena. If you're lucky enough to see a Bigfoot, have that experience, it's pretty unusual for me to go on an expedition and not at least have a Class B encounter. Class A's I've never had. But so I think one of the reasons people aren't doing science is because they think what we're doing is science. Because it is empirical. The definition of empiricism does include both observational empiricism and experimental empiricism. And in experimental empiricism, you get statistics and a more sophisticated experimental design going to try and prove the species exists. Then apparently in observational empiricism, where it's your observations and experiences that prove it and make the difference. I think the Bigfoot as a community and Bigfoot as a species kind of might have a little bit of a bias against it. If you think about, again, the Patterson-Gimlin film, they two witnesses videotape footprints that were also videotaped, foot casts. There's quite a few data points if stories or video were going to be enough to prove it. It's my belief, although I can't state this factually, I think other species have been declared species with that kind of evidence, and that didn't seem to make a dent in things for us. So I think we got a little bit of a higher bar, a higher scientific bar for scientific proof than some other. I could be wrong about that. But so many people have come to understand research to go out and do expeditions, collect your data, write it down, discuss it amongst others, and that's about as far as it goes. Maybe report it to a BFRO website or somewhere on the web. And I guess that's as far as you would expect observational empiricism to go. But we need to go the extra mile. We need to go to using experimental empiricism. And we got to do that because the thing most available to us is Bigfoot phenomena. Now, we've been observing Bigfoot phenomena for over 60 years. We haven't proved Bigfoot exists as a species. That 60 years of phenomenological experience, of phenomena, of experiences, what people see and do and experience related to Bigfoot when they go out on an expedition, that's the foundation upon which science has to rest. So we got a good 60-year firm foundation at this point, but we got to move forward with science. Science is going to require us to change our philosophies a little bit, work a little bit harder, be more organized with our documentation and our raw data. But the major hurdle that I think that our community needs to look at and accept is we've got to learn more about experimental design and statistical analysis. Because it's experimental design and statistical analysis that represents the bridge into the science world. The world of science talks experiments. The world of science talks numbers and statistics and probability statements and error rates. And if we want to prove Bigfoot scientifically exists as a species, guess what? We're going to have to start doing that level of science. We're going to have to raise the bar and begin to add experimental designs, set up an experiment, record your results, then reduce your results down to numbers. Each phenomena might be assigned a particular number. Keep your records on the days, dates, times of days, weather, overcast, whatever he thinks important to record that could be an influencing variable. That's what you call systematic error. When you know certain things are going to come to bear and influence your data, your research, how you collect it, your ability to successfully collect it, you've got to manage that, what's called systematic error. You've got to anticipate it and predict it, and use that and cover for that systematic area through your experimental design, so that minimally impacts the results, or not at all, ideally. And so for the next step, in my humble opinion, is people have to get just as obsessed with learning to run a statistics package that'll give you descriptive statistics, mean, standard deviations, what it looks like on the normal curve. But you also got to get obsessed with learning how to do inferential statistics that tells us, based on the sample data, the slice of the pie that we got when we collect our data, our scientific data, what does that whole slice of pie look like in the North American continent? And the statistical analysis that does that for you is inferential statistics. But they'll both be in the statistical package that I grew up with was Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, SSPS, and then they came out with an SSPSX. If people would become as consumed and obsessed with that and learning that, a couple people in each group or organization learning to do that, we could then do more experiments and advance more statistical analysis. And the whole reason for science is to allow our hypothetical question and the results of our study to give us the answers. Right now, we mainly rely on opinion, or who has the loudest voice, or who's the most influential speaker. We come up with lots and lots of ideas, and we jump from an idea and call it a theory. Well, my theory is that when a group of four walks down a path where Bigfoot exists, that we'll hear four tree knocks to designate that they understand the number of people in our group. Okay, well, if that's your theory, number one, that's an interesting theory. Number two, we've skipped from an idea to a theory, and we have to go back a step and form a hypothesis. Oh, well, your hypothesis then would be, if we walked down an active path with two people, we'd only get 2 knocks. 3 people, 3 knocks. 4 people, 4 knocks. And test that hypothesis out by keeping track of the number of knocks that come spontaneously, as well as the number of knocks that come when you provoke a knock. If you're trying to test out your belief, your hypothesis, that the number of tree knocks a Bigfoot makes reflects the size of the crowd. That's been offered up as a theory to me on an expedition. And aside from walking in the woods maybe, and one day that happening, that's primarily coincidence. There could be a correlation there, but I think it's pretty weak. I've been doing this for 6 years now, and I've heard one undeniable tree knock in 6 years. I'm so envious of people on the internet who interact with these things on a daily basis. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I still haven't seen one for a Class A experience. So I do not have the same experiences and relationships that people who tell me they see them every day or every week, or they're interacting into their house, they're coming into my house. I've heard it. I just want to see one up pretty close, so it's identifiable as an unmistaken Bigfoot. No blob squatch. But that's hard to do, just like it is to see an emotion or directly measure an emotion with a wire, just like it's hard to measure intelligence. Psychology as a science, the good news is, and why we're equipped to help with Bigfoot, is we've tamed the beast of emotions. We've tamed the beast of intellect. You can't directly measure those things. You can't put your hands on them. You can't taste them. You can't smell them. You can't do a direct measurement of the concepts of emotion and intelligence, much in the same way that it's pretty difficult to get a direct measure of time. Well, now everybody just goes into the computer. It's set by the atomic watch. You reset your watch. But without a watch, it would be harder to keep track of time. So our watches are analogs, or representation for us of time. Well, in the Bigfoot community, the analog for Bigfoot is Bigfoot phenomena. And that's the analog for emotions and intellect. We can see an emotional outburst, but we can't tap into that raw emotion that's measuring it, or that's driving it. We can't measure that. But we've come up with tests to be able to measure emotions and personality. Intelligence. You can't hold your hands on somebody's heads and divine how intelligent they are with a blindfold on your face. I mean, maybe there are some people that can. My point being, we can't directly measure intelligence. We came up with tools and tests to measure intelligence, and now we can throw a number on you after giving you an IQ test. My point being, psychological experimentation and statistical analysis and research have been able to define and measure these elusive abstract words or concepts, something that you can't readily see, something that you can't touch. And Bigfoot meets a lot of those qualities. The other reason that psychology is well equipped to help with this situation is we know numbers, we need no experiments. And again, I said it earlier, that's the scientific language. That's the language other sciences speak in, and that's the language we need to learn to speak in. And in order to learn to speak in those languages, before you invest in your next FLIR or your next the hover things, I'm blocking on what they're called, drone. Before you spend a couple thousand on a drone, think about spending $1,000, $1,500 on a statistical package to put on your computer, so that you can change your raw data, your castings, your recordings of your knocks, any experimental data that you may have written down in log because you set up an experiment. All that can now be reduced into numbers. Those numbers can be analyzed. That analysis can tell us the answer to the question that we made when we got our hypothesis going. And we let the numbers tell us the proof. Right now, we rely a lot on opinion or ideas. Ideas quickly morph into theories without ever going through hypothetical testing. Before you ever call something a theory, if you're going to be scientific about it, you first have to start thinking about it and calling it a hypothesis. And you've got to repeatedly prove that hypothesis many times over before you can begin to start thinking of it as a theory. So please, let's start the tiny step. of moving towards science and calling our ideas hypotheses rather than theories. We're nowhere near theories. Theories have got to be tested out just like hypotheses do after you test out the hypotheses. So we can't make the changes until we start using the proper language. And using the proper language is part of what this show is about. Giving you some of the scientific terms, some of the Bigfoot terms, most of which the Bigfoot terms, I imagine most people are going to be familiar with them. But not everybody's going to be familiar with the scientific terms. And these terms need to become a common part, just like theory has become a common part of our language in Bigfootdom. Hypothesis needs to become the word we use first and part of our daily language in Bigfoot, because we can't be talking about a theory or shouldn't be talking about a theory in terms of science if we first weren't talking about that same darn thing as a hypothesis. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys. I sure hope it does. So, thus the show, and there was the story. There was my preaching from the pulpit for the night. But you're about to see an example, or if you're listening, you're going to be out of luck, but you're about to see an example of the sophistication of my technical prowess in downloading images, multimedia, well, I'm good at slides, downloading other images that can then be integrated into a slide. You're about to see an example of that. And if you like this example, submit. If you get a joke from, or not submit, subscribe. If you don't like this awesome piece of multimedia artwork that I'm about to put up from you, subscribe some more so that somebody can help me do some of this dynamic photo stuff. Like my buddy Wayne Tothero, the graphics on his show and the pictures that they use on their show are incredible. I don't know how they get those things in their ads and stuff. But this is about as good as I could do for a show entitled Sasquatch Scientific Vocabulary Tutorial. And for those of you who can't see it, it's a very simple cutout monkey or Bigfoot, if you will. There's two of the identical ones. I just copied them. And they've got little dialogue boxes next to them. And both have their right arm, well, my right, their left arms up, pointing to the dialogue box. And the one monkey comes out and he wants to talk about DNA. So he yells, DNA! But the monkey standing next to him doesn't understand science. And he replies, ABC? So that's my attempt at humor. That's the graphic power I have to add entertaining visuals into my show. So I know you're not here for the visuals. Let's see what I can add otherwise. We're starting with the A's. So, unfortunately, the first thing that comes to mind that begins with an A in Bigfoot expeditions is alcohol. A distilled spirit, not the eternal or eternal ghost kind, but the liquid substance. It is best used to calm one's nerves around a campfire after an up-close and personal encounter with Bigfoot, or a predatory non-target species such as bears, big cats, wolves, coyotes, foxes, wild pigs, and the top of the rung predator and thing to be worried about in the woods when you're looking for Bigfoot is the human beings, because we are the apex predators overall. And frankly, I carry concealed, I've got a license, and I'm carrying that not because I think Bigfoot's going to attack me, but I think my risk of being attacked by a human being exists more so than by Bigfoot. So if alcohol doesn't do it for you, though, Xanax works well. But don't use alcohol before you go out on the trail. Don't be drunk. No, don't be high out on the trail. You don't want something to either artificially enhance your perception, especially if you're doing experientials, and you don't want something to artificially suppress your perceptual abilities. Alcohol is a depressant. Your wits and all your sensory abilities will dull and numb. Not to mention, if you're walking out in the woods in the middle of the night, not to mention the day, you can fall, twist your ankle. One expedition I was, somebody broke their ankle because they unknowingly stepped in a hole in a meadow. There's a lot of danger, physical danger, associated with going out and walking through a meadow in the woods, be it night or day. So your encounter might include, but is not limited to, a blood-curdling scream, growl, or howl, or bark, a gruff or a snuff. I've only heard one, but when you hear it, you'll know it. A bluff charge, that dank, rotting meat smell, dog or other putrid smell were nearby in the bushes, something you heard rustling, a falling tree, a landslide, a tree break, a tree knock, if they even use sticks in trees. Sticks, stones, rocks, nuts, tree branches, trees being thrown at you, and face-to-face encounters. The best I've done is I've seen a group of infants with red eye glow, and they were glowing. It wasn't a reflection, I can tell you that much. It was like they twisted in some light bulbs into their head and were turning the lights off and on, is the best way to describe it. Halogen lights at that. This does not, however, in any way preclude, well, yeah, okay. I forgot to say, especially if you're in the woo community, I know, and I guess I can understand why some people in the woo community, they get screwed up. They get effed up when they go into the woods. They drop acid, hallucinogens, things that can enhance your enlightenment. Things that will open up your sensory channels. Well, one of the problems with using LSD or mushrooms or anything like that, opening your sensory channels, is they will. But then you're going to be hearing things you wouldn't normally hear in the woods, and you're going to hear things you normally wouldn't be hearing, and then it becomes a challenge to distinguish whether those things you're hearing are in your head or in the woods. So I think go straight when you go out on an expedition. Once you come back, pound them if you want to, smoke them if you want to, but you want your perception to be as clean and clear as possible, because your perception is what you're going to filter your experience through. And so this makes it all the more important for experiential expeditions, where we're using our own perception of what's going on to inform what we're looking at. Sensation happens before the millisecond that sensation hits your brain, that shooting pain, that screeching voice, that sensation, the millisecond or millisecond that registers on your brain, and your brain processes that. That's what we call perception. And you know what? Perception is not objective. Sensation is. But as soon as that sensation hits our brain, we use our perception. And our perception is informed and generated, and we learn from our childhood to perceive things through our environment, through our interaction with other human beings, through our interaction with our five senses, 6 if you're lucky. And so all those things, where you went to high school, where you grew up, what you mother fed you for meals, home cooked, going out, all these things are part of your life. But all those things are influencing your perception of the sensation, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings that are coming into your body on a Bigfoot expedition. And so you need to want those sensory abilities to be as keen and your thinking as clear as you can when you go into those woods. Okay? And so I was saying that especially related to woo. Well, I'm not saying that people are dropping acid and imagining woo experiences. I'm not saying they're getting shit-faced drunk and puking because they're having an infrasound experience. This advice that I'm giving you doesn't preclude the phenomena, but the advice and the scientific techniques I teach here are to increase your objectivity of the phenomena so that you can be in a better experiential empiricist in Bigfoot, and you can become a scientific and data-driven and data analysis, statistical analysis driven Bigfoot scientist. We've been doing we've been doing the experiential empiricism for 60 years. Guys, we have got to move forward with the data-driven, numbers-driven, and experimentally driven empirical science to get Bigfoot, in my opinion, but I'm biased. But if you're biased through your perception, you bring pre-existing bias to your hypothesis. And that's how we jump from a hypothesis to a theory without ever testing your hypothesis. I advise against using this alcohol substance before going out, as it distorts your perception, can make stumbling through the woods in the dark a dangerous experience. Nonetheless, liberal quantities may be consumed by some. Please be aware that if you're going to drink, a lot of people don't know this. This always surprises me. Maybe I spent too much time in bars. But be aware that one beer is the equivalent of one glass of wine, one mixed drink, a cocktail or a hot toddy, and most wine coolers and hard cider drinks that are out these days. They're all equivalent to a beer in terms of the amount of the active ingredient, ethanol, in the drink. They can get one drink is one drink, whether it's a beer or whatever else you're getting in you. If it's used in the more moderate quantities, you will not need to look up the definition of hangover, because you'll have a personal definition if you go beyond moderate. And if you go beyond moderate and are walking out in the woods, good luck. You're going to have some other definitions come to you. Vessel. Butthole. But it's in the A column. What you call someone who during the night excursions tries to scare the shit and piss out of you. Also, what you call someone with whom you get into a heated debate on the origins of the Bigfoot species. The former and the later are strongly discouraged on expeditions, and that's the truth. They're screening people, they're not looking for people. Well, you can have your own strong, unhypothetically tested theories that you want on an expedition. But when some blank hole starts getting in a drunken debate with you over them, that's not acceptable. Or a sober debate where things get heated. That's not acceptable. Assholes are poor hiking and camping. They make strange bedfellows, not to mention smelly porta potties and latrine sites, especially when your site is positioned upwind or downwind of base camp. Excuse me. Back with the A's. Awe. Awe is the emotion, I defined it as the emotion inspired from a close encounter with Bigfoot. I think a good visual representation of awe to me is watching an infant or a newborn baby when they see something for the first time. And you can just see their eyes light up and their body contort in excitement and awe. Next one is aw shit. That's what a Bigfoot reacher says, and sometimes does in their shorts during a close encounter with Bigfoot. Here we come with a big one, a 25-cent word. You got to practice saying this word before you can say it correctly. I have forever said it anthropomorphism. Poor. It's not poor morphism. It's anthropomorphism. Many of you may know what this is, but for those of you who don't, it's the attribution of human characteristics or behavior to a god, animal, or object. Now, I don't want to get into a religious debate here. I guess as a Christian, I believe we're built in the same image as our God. So we'll just set that aside. Not everybody is a Christian. Not everybody believes in God. A lot of people don't believe in church, but have a higher power. But in anthropomorphism, we're assigning human characteristics and qualities to an animal or an object that sometimes might possess those qualities and abilities, but oftentimes doesn't have them at all. For our purposes, we need to be concerned about how this process applies to Bigfoot. How smart is your dog? How many words, vocabulary does your dog have? Are they sweet and loving? How do you know they're loving? You can't directly measure it, but you can figure it out nonetheless. So we've got to be concerned as much about anthropomorphizing Bigfoot as we are about attaching those labels to objects, animals, demons, inter or intra-dimensional beings or not. In my experience, it is indeed rare to meet a Bigfoot researcher that does not anthropomorphize. I've often heard one of the most famous people in Bigfoot anthropomorphize, and probably so have you. The most glaring example of this is the often repeated statement, well, Bigfoots are curious, that's why they come in on us, because they're curious and they want to check us out and know what we're doing and how we're doing. Okay. So really, how do you do that? How do you know that it's curiosity? Curiosity is an emotion, and curiosity requires a psychological differentiation between oneself, you, me, my body, my thoughts, they're all mine, and somebody else outside of ourselves. Now we're not concerned just with ourselves, we're concerned with the people around us. So curiosity is a higher order process that involves cerebral matter, gray matter, that many other species do not possess in their skull. Can you really read their mind or feel their intrinsic curiosity? Is that what it would have to boil down to? Now, there are true psychics out there, and they may be able to do that. The answer for them would be yes. But for the average Bigfoot field researcher, we have long, you think about how many times you've said it. You think about any big name, and I'm not going to name them, but the biggest names in Bigfoot, think about how much they talk about how curious Bigfoots are. Well, that's an example of what I'm talked about a few slides ago. That's an example of observing some behaviors and without doing any hypothesis testing, beginning to call it a theory. Bigfoot was watching me and I didn't see it. Or I saw Bigfoot near a kid's playground watching the kids. Don't worry about it. They're just curious. How do you know that? The only way to know that is to run some experiments on curiosity and see if that's the emotion that they're experiencing. See if they got the gray matter to be self-aware, and not only self-aware, but aware that ourselves end at some limit and others begin outside that limit. Well, they follow us when we come into the forest. That proves they're curious. They hang out near the children and watch them play because they're curious about kids. Because they're so curious about what we're doing. They come and investigate us, and they know we're in the woods long before we know they're in the woods. Well, I don't know about that. We're going to the woods because we know Bigfoots are in the woods. Well, if curiosity killed the cat, there would apparently not be any Bigfoots alive today, because it seems that curiosity within our community of paperless data is one of the most common phrases that you will hear attributed to or assigned to Bigfoot, and we're totally taking that for granted. There are no curiosity studies on Bigfoot. More importantly, there aren't any curiosity studies involving experimentation and statistical analysis, which if you're going to isolate an emotion or a thought or a style of thinking, buddy, you need your data. And whoops and where they sit or how they sit or if they yawn or which side of their mouth opens up. None of that stuff's going to tell you anything about curiosity. On the other hand, while such ideas and statements are intuitively appealing and seem supported by logical reasoning on a personal, phenomenological, experiential level, based on their behaviors, again, they remain unproven from a scientific, hypothetical perspective. We go from an idea, an observation, to a hypothesis, to repeatedly having that hypothesis retested and reconfirmed, and then we can begin to call it a tentative theory, and we test our tentative theory, retest it, over-test it, other people replicate our data, and it gets the same results as a tentative theory. So then we can call it a theory, guys. Not when we jump from an observation to a theory. That's not a theory, guys. That's a hypothesis. So let's take a look at curiosity, shall we? Guarding behavior, maternal instincts, submission behavior, aggression behavior, denial, revenge, tribalism, loyalty, fear, and protection. Oh, I see this slide's a little off. All the behaviors that I just listed, tribal loyalties and behaviors, loyalty, fear, procreation, denial, maternal instinct, submissive behavior, aggressive behavior. All these behaviors, guess what? They're hardwired into our bodies, humans' bodies. And if Bigfoot has any kind of hominin nervous system, they're going to be hardwired into Bigfoot as well. These guys are instincts. And I think most of us go through our life thinking about them as thoughts. You don't have to think about an instinct. If you've got maternal instincts, when that baby cries, somebody doesn't have to go tell you to pick up the baby. You know your baby's trying to communicate with you and tell you something. If you're about to, and if you know about you're about to get your butt kicked, and you lay on the ground and or put your hands up, and don't want any trouble. You don't have to think about that. You're fearful enough to demonstrate submissive behavior, which is an instinct, as is aggressive behavior. Instincts happen in the flash of a millisecond because they're not thought processes. They're pre-programmed, hardwired into our body behavioral chains and behavioral reactions. The one that many of us are familiar with is the fight-flight response. You don't have to think about whether it's time to run or not. When you get your fight-flight kicks in, you're running already, buddy. It's an instinctual, hardwired reaction. The same with the opossum. I grew up learning that opossums always play dead. So we had an opossum in our garage. My dad said, "We got a possum in your garage." And I don't know how old I was, young and ignorant, no doubt. And I said, "Oh, I'll go get the opossum." So I go trotting out there, all proud, planning on grabbing it by the tail and just casually carrying it through our house and putting it back outside. Well, guess what happened when I arrived with that opossum? He was cornered and he was sitting on his hind legs, hissing and growling at me. And if you've ever looked closely at an opossum's teeth, I think they're like jaws of the land. They are just sharp, needle-pointed teeth that when you see them and you look close enough to see how much those things are going to hurt when they go into your skin, they're not playing dead, and you're not going to grab them by the tail. I guarantee you that. Again, the emphasis here is hardwired instinctual explanations for curiosity. All those things, stalking, playing, pursuit predation, ambush predation, these are instincts, hardwired. We don't think about it. Our body guides us. Our instincts guide us in how it's done. So, when you're walking in the woods and you hear a bipedal step following you, and when you stop, they stop. And when you start walking, their bipedal step picks up. And it stays either behind you, beside you, or in front of you. Well, I'm sure it's comforting to think it's curiosity. I know I always pray it is. But it could be revenge. You're in my territory. Get out. You're intruding on my activity. It could be guarding behavior. My clan just had a baby. Stay away. It could be hunger. I'm going to stalk you. You don't have to think about being hungry. You're hungry. You will begin stalking. You will become predatory. The difference between pursuit predation or predation and ambush predation. A pursuit predator, those are the ones that are you're going to hear walking behind you or in front of you or beside you, because they pursue or follow and track their prey. Why else might Bigfoot be walking behind me or beside me or in front of me? Is he going to get the welcome mat out for me at the end of the trail? Open my door? And I'm not saying that it can't involve intelligence, but I think we're taking a big leap. We're anthropomorphizing when we automatically assign it to intelligence or curiosity, because we haven't captured and experimentally measured those unmeasurable things in humans, and it's going to likely be unmeasurable in Sasquatch. And again, that's why psychology good. Psychology, science good. So a pursuit predator pursues his prey. Ambush predator, they don't come after you. They're waiting for you on down the trail. They're hid behind that stump or up a tree or behind a rock, or they keep moving around you while you're moving trying to find them. They're waiting for you to cross that line where you're close enough that they can get with you. Now, again, this discussion could get into debate or whether they're friendly or not. Are they warm and fuzzy, lovey-dovey, or are they a beast? And maybe there are different species. Maybe the forest people are warm and loving and want to relate and interact with humans. And maybe there's another subspecies of Bigfoot that just wants to eat your lunch. The people that I know that claim to know forest people, those are where some of the unusual stories come from. I heard a story from a forest person advocate where this human woman had a Bigfoot daycare center, basically. And she was so close with her Bigfoot community that mom or dad Bigfoot would drop off the kids for daycare 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. This woman cared for the Bigfoot baby while mom and dad went out and did their thing. Do I know if that's real or not? I don't. I don't know any forest people, so I don't even know if that's possible. But I suspect a lot of forest people would tell me it was or is. If you look online, it seems that there's one group of people who have these very intimate relationships with Bigfoot. And I'm not talking sexually intimate. I'm talking a relationship, an interaction, lines of communications, lines of exchange and sharing is what I'm talking about when I talk about intimate relationship. And these people supposedly see their Bigfoot friends every day. I wish I could meet some Bigfoots like that. The big ones I'm around are the ones that hide like hell. So, how else are we anthropomorphizing Bigfoot? And can it be to our detriment? Let's take a look at abductions. There have been no formal recorded killings or children or adults by Bigfoot. Well, how do you slap a charge on a beast you can't see? Good point. How are you going to charge Bigfoot with killing if you can't find Bigfoot. So no, when I say formal, I'm referring to police and government officials getting involved and intervening because of an abduction. In doing my research for my Ketchum study, I did run into a lot of articles confirming that the FBI did examine Bigfoot hair. So the government at least has gotten that much involved in Bigfoot research. And what did they find? They didn't find any unknown species in their Bigfoot hairs and whatever else they use for their data. Now, in the same ballpark of abduction or killing, we've got abductions. And Albert Ostman was an abductee. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this story. I had forgotten a lot of details, but the story goes that he was out in the wilderness, laying in his sleeping bag. I could be mistaken, but I think he went in there with somebody else and they separated at some point. So he was just kind of hanging out in his sleeping bag, waiting for this person to return, I believe. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But all of a sudden he wakes up and he feels his body being dragged over the ground. And he looks up, and I don't know if it was so dark if he could even make out a hand or an arm, but something was definitely dragging him. And it dragged him up one mountain and down another, across the creek, up another mountain, down another mountain, some creeks and trees, and up another mountain. And somewhere around the third or fourth mountain up, being dragged mostly. I don't know if he was carried over the water. I imagine they had to do some stream crossings. But he eventually ended up in a cave, and as he came to in the cave, he was in a cave with multiple Bigfoots. And they would not let him leave that cave. They were not abusive of him in the sense of physically terrorizing him. They kind of let him keep his distance. They fed him. They interacted together on some levels. But eventually he did something to divert him and ran out of the cave. Somebody just told me what it was he did to divert the Bigfoot. Maybe it was food related or fire related. I'm not sure. I did want to know at one time, but he skedaddled out of that cave after a week of living with male, female, and adolescent Bigfoots, both male and female adolescents. And that's been pretty well documented. I think he's even gone under a lie detector test. He's been interviewed by people quite a bit. Well documented abduction. He's an abductee. He was abducted. And then there's the case of 3-year-old Joseph Leffler. And the long and short of this story was that the kid turned out missing. And after, I'm not sure if it was a period of hours. I think it was quite a few hours rather than days or weeks. But all of a sudden he shows up just standing near where some of the people were. And they asked him, and he said that he was hanging out with a bear, I think, and they were taking care of him. And then they brought him back. I think, I don't want to spread false information. I'm not sure whether somebody saw the Bigfoot carry the child back and, put it within reach, the child within reach. I'm not sure if that involved a sighting or whether he was found isolated from the Bigfoot. But abductions, violence, fear, hunger, these things are going to fuel abductions, and they're instinctual, guys. They're instinctual. They're hardwired into our body. Petting and playing. Now, I've never seen a Bigfoot do this or even heard of a Bigfoot doing this. I've heard of Bigfoots hanging out with other animals, having a good old time. But, so I can't say this about Bigfoot, but I do want to say this about polar bears. If you go onto the internet, you will see multiple pictures and actually videotape of polar bears playing, apparently playing with dogs, playing with seals. But guess what? You've seen it in a cat and mouse game. The predator will often play with its meal before they kill it and eat it. So before you start using and playing with the dog, playing with the seal, and it indeed may be playing, but there's a highly likelihood, because of how a creature is wired to meet those instincts, the instinct for hunger, that is a pre-programmed behavior for a polar bear to do with its prey before they kill it, or maybe a little bit after they wound it. They don't always just chow down and chow through it. It could also be grooming behavior. Oh, look, honey, that female Bigfoot is rubbing the shoulders, petting the shoulders of her mate. They must be in love. They could be grooming each other, if you believe they're connected to us and they share common genes with monkeys and the great ape. Grooming is an instinctual behavior. You get an itch and you go to grooming. And the third and final instinctual behavior that could explain curiosity and other things: vigilance. Bigfoots are alertly watchful, especially to avoid danger. And again, this vigilance, this looking out, this is a species-specific, hardwired phenomena in our bodies. Could be in the Bigfoot's body. In the same way, playing dead is hardwired into an opossum. When they feel threatened, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to play dead, or they're going to show you your teeth and their claws, and it's going to get nasty. My point remains, these are all genetically inbred, species-specific behaviors. And guess what? They don't involve an ounce of intelligence and very little gray matter of the brain. This is snake kind of stuff. You know, snakes are on the lower down on the phylum or on the tree of intelligence, because they have very little gray matter in their brain. They have their primitive brain, and we have humans, and maybe Bigfoot has its primitive brain that keeps us breathing, that keeps our heart beating, that keeps our hair growing, that keeps the blood flowing through our body, that keeps us blinking and moistening our eyes, growing hair. Anything that we don't have to think about is taken care of or originates from the primitive brain. That's our brain stem in the human brain. However, we've got this thing called gray matter that is on top of our primitive brain. It's called gray matter because when you look at that tissue and you compare in slicing a brain, not lengthwise but widthwise, as they do for MRI for certain kinds of studies. Now we slice it with radioactivity or the magnetism. But back in the day, they just took that brain right out of your skull and went to slicing. And when they went to slicing, they noticed that the very surface area of the brain is colored gray. So frequently, many people use the slang for brain and they call it gray matter. In fact, gray matter is just one small part of your brain tissue. You got white matter, and there's a lot more white matter in your brain than there is gray matter. You know why it's called white? Because it's white. When they did the slicings of the brain, that tissue was white. The gray matter was gray, darkish black. But these behaviors that could be mistaken curiosity for are going on, happening automatically in that primitive brain. And before we start attributing characteristics to an unknown species that require gray matter functioning, curiosity, a sense of self compared to a sense of others, which requires gray matter, we got to get a look at their brain, or experimentally with psychological science, test, is this instinctual reflexive behavior? Is it on automatic pilot? Or are they thinking, boy, I'm pretty full of a meal today, honey. I think I'm going to go hang out in the trees and watch the kids play softball. Because there's going to be some higher order reasoning in curiosity. But you don't have to have that higher order reasoning to act curious. It could be due to any of the number of things I've discussed in this section of this show. Thank you very much. We certainly do need to rule out these biological DNA-driven instincts prior to ruling in higher cortical processes involving self-awareness to be curious. So let's talk a little bit about awareness. Perception or knowledge of something. Accurate reportability of something perceived or known. It's usually used as a behavioral index of conscious awareness. However, it's possible, get a little of this, it's possible to be aware of something without explicitly being conscious of it. I've got too many examples I could give you of that in my own life. Freaking running around looking for my glasses, working myself up into a panic because I got to find the glasses to drive, and I got to drive to get to work, and oh my goodness. And I just happen past a mirror, and I'll be damned if those glasses aren't on my face already. So you can have an awareness. I'm still aware when I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. I'm aware that I don't know where my glasses are. But I'm not conscious of the fact that they're sitting right on my face. That kind of happens over the years with weight too, you know. Your weight sneaks and sneaks and sneaks up on you. We may be aware of that extra weight, but we lose touch with it in explicit consciousness of it. I know. I am an expert on which I'm speaking there. So what's the difference between awareness and self-awareness? Self-focused attention or knowledge there has been a continuing controversy over whether non-human animals have self-awareness. The best test, science marches on, the best test we can come up with to determine if somebody's self-aware, like a chimp is self-aware, is to give them a mirror. And if they look at the mirror and start grooming themselves utilizing that mirror, they're self-aware, because they're aware that that reflection that they're looking on in the mirror is them, but is still different from them. Wow, pretty amazing. So a few chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans have passed that test. Not all of them, some exceptions. So we're moving from the A's to the C's. And we're talking about confabulation. In neurologic science, the brain's tendency to fill in the blanks with information that may or may not be factually accurate, when the subject cannot remember or accurately recollect or recall what happened. In effect, the brain makes something up, information, memories, images, sounds, smells, to reduce the dissonance or the discomfort due to inconsistencies between what they should remember and they can't remember, or other kinds of dissonance, discomfort, unsteadiness, off keel, because they're not remembering something, because there are blank spots. You know, people with right cerebral vascular accidents, God bless you guys, frequently their memory impairment goes undetected because the right side of the brain contains their visual memory rather than their verbal memory. So if you're working with a new neuropsychologist who doesn't know what they're doing, and your grandma has dementia or your grandma had a stroke on the right side of the brain, and they throw a memory test at them that involves words, guess what? They're going to kick butt on that memory test. But they might not be able to tell you what they just talked about as they were sitting down looking at you and interacting with you, or what you're wearing, or what you said. Those modalities can cross over and contaminate each other. They're certainly not going to be aware of pictures or a television show if they've got right brain damage, because it's visual spatial side of your brain rather than the linguistically logical side of your brain. So when there are memory blanks, your brain can automatically fill those gaps for you. You don't have to think about it. It'll just fill it in on its own, and there will be a memory there, and you'll report that memory, oftentimes without ever thinking about whether it's an accurate one or not. Confabulation will also occur as a result of dreaming, eyewitness testimony under interview stress, such as police or military interrogations, courtroom testimony, and is exploited in brainwash materials or procedures. There's an optimal level of cognitive and mental stimulation that you need to have your brain and your memory function optimally. If you don't have enough stimulation of the brain, you're going to miss things because you're not aroused properly, or you're not completely aware or alert. If you get overstimulated, it's going to go the other way as well, because now you're so stressed out you can't pay attention, and you're not hearing what people are saying to you. You're thinking so much about your confusion that you can't focus. Those are the times when confabulation can become active, because those are the times you're going to forget. And if that forgetting bothers you enough, your brain can insert a slide there so you're more comfortable with not forgetting that. And that slide may be an accurate one or may be an inaccurate one. Confabulation, guess what? It also occurs as a result and during trauma, result of and during trauma. And this trauma can be war trauma, motor vehicle accident trauma, having your life threatened trauma, your kids' lives being threatened, witnessing a death, coming close to death, watching somebody death or dying, or watching somebody coming close to death or dying. And you can experience trauma from a Bigfoot encounter. And I'm here to tell you that I've sat around many of a campfire with people who are brimming over with PTSD, and they don't have a clue. The point being here that a Class A encounter for sure, for some people who are nervous Nellies, even a Class B encounter can become potentially traumatic because of the stress that's associated with it, whether or not it activates your fight-flight response. You can develop PTSD without ever having a fight-flight response. That's not part of PTSD. It often is, but you don't have to have a fight-flight response to qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. But you can develop confabulation when you don't remember parts of an event, in particular type A, type B classification. If it gets traumatizing for you, if it gets over stressful for you, you may find yourself with memory blanks or memory blocks associated with that event. That is a symptom of PTSD, those memory blocks or loss of memory surrounding the traumatic event itself. Doesn't give you, just having that one symptom isn't enough, but that is one of the symptoms. And as I'm recording this for you guys, it's being recorded one day before I leave on the next day to go to Minnesota and be part of Legend Meets Science 2 documentary. And we're going to look and do some hypnosis with people who have memory gaps or memory blocks associated with their Bigfoot experiences, and see if we can use hypnosis to help them regain and recall some of those experiences without us planting those experiences in their head, or without us provoking their brain and their body to spontaneously come up with memories. I'm really looking forward to it. Moving on to the next C for the show. That next C is confirmation bias. Oh boy, is this a term that the Bigfoot community needs to understand and needs to vigilantly guard themselves against. The problem with picking up on confirmation bias is you don't know when you're doing it, so oftentimes you can't catch it. Our bodies, our nervous systems make us a bias machine, again, to come back to it again, because we're processing the world coming into us through our sensory abilities, our sensations. And those sensations are filtered or morphed or reinterpreted differently by different people because of their perception. So the fact that our bodies differentiate between sensation and perception involves our whole life experience, and that feeds into how we perceive things. We're biased machines. We can't help but be biased. I hope you guys follow that point, because that's a very important point. And that's one of the main points that comes into confirmation bias. In confirmation bias, there's a tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconception, typically by interpreting evidence to confirm that existing belief or preconception, and then rejecting or ignoring any conflicting data. It's the tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconceptions, or as we call them here, theories. They're not theories, they're hypotheses. But it's a tendency to look for information that supports your hypothesis rather than rejects one's hypothesis. One's preconceptions, typically by interpreting evidence to confirm their existing beliefs, while rejecting or ignoring any conflicting data. It's part of the human condition, guys. We do it every day. Sometimes to help us cope. Sometimes it just happens. But, everything is processed through our evidence register that Bigfoot is woo. Everything's processed through our perceptual register that Bigfoot's flesh and blood. Everything's processed through our religious beliefs as Bigfoot's a Nephilim or has spiritual qualities. We can't separate ourselves from our perceptual experiences, because those cells, literally those cells that control our perception, have grown and developed through interacting with our environment and perceiving our environment. So on a cellular level, that bias is built in there. We can't avoid it. It has the potential to run rampant in Bigfoot field research, especially that which seems to take a quantum leap from observation to theory creation. I've already harped on this. Bypassing every necessary step of hypothesis testing. Do you agree or disagree with Wu phenomena? Honestly, Wu phenomena, if you read quantum physics and other physics books, part of the reason I remain open to Wu phenomena is because a lot of them can be grounded in the most advanced physics theories that we understand. Tearing a time between in space and time. This solid table is mostly space that my computer is resting on, because the electrons are circling it in such a fast fashion as to cause it to look solid and feel solid when we touch it. But there's more space in that molecule of wood. There's more space in my computer materials that it's made of than there is solid. So I remain open to Wu phenomena because a lot of them that are grounded in theoretical physics. It's possible, in my opinion. However, I do nonetheless personally believe that confirmation bias played and continues to play in the proliferation of bizarre theories that we really should be calling hypotheses. How can they disappear and reappear so quick? Well, they must be changing their molecular vibratory qualities. They can mask or cloak like that one in Predator. They can shift into another dimension and appear to disappear right before their eyes. You know what? I think, though, all those things are theoretically feasible. But before I start ruling those things in, I'm going to use the principle of parsimony and try and explain what's happening in a more, quote, realistic, end quote, because it could be the portal opening up to another dimension that's real. We just don't experience that as consensual reality. But I'm open to those things being theoretically possible because of their theoretical groundings in physics. But before I accept that as the theory or the explanation, I'm going to test it. I'm going to figure out a way to test that hypothesis, because that's all it is. It's a hypothesis. Well, how are you going to do that? That's a darn good question. I've got some ideas for mind speak. I got an experiment I want to do with mind speak. But portals, I'm not sure how we're going to capture portals, because when you're doing science, you want repeatability. And although there are repeatedly portal events apparently happening with Bigfoots, it's going to be pretty tough to consciously or with volition create the same portal at the same time in the same way under the same conditions as that first portal you saw Bigfoot go through. And what dimension are they going to? Do they go in and out of the same dimension anytime? Can they skip around dimensions? Before we start looking into that, we got to look into what things could be. Are we confabulating this stuff? Are we making it up in our brain? But you know, when you think about how can they disappear or reappear quickly, there are flesh and blood, and I don't know if I'm a flesh or blooder or a wooer or somewhere in between, but there are phenomena on Earth, there are creatures on Earth whose genetics allow them to do some of this stuff. Eye glow, for one. Lived in Mexico for a while, would go down to the ocean. There were these green chartreuse glowing plankton that would come through the water. And they would just light up the water with green light as if you had did a green glow stick and threw it into the water. They were an algae that was self-emanating glowing green light. Well, damn, if an algae can create glowing green light out of its simple or its simple cellular structure, why the hell can't Bigfoot generate a red glowing light out of its ocular tissue? Well, they disappear in the blink of an eye. They must be going into another dimension, or they must have a cloaking shield. Does the animal chameleon come to mind? Chameleons adapt to the color of their surrounding environment very quickly to camouflage themselves. Or those moths that blend in perfectly with the wood. They can shift into another dimension right before his eyes. On that same pier that I saw the glowing algae, I would also look into the water and watch fish swim. And this didn't happen with all the fish, but if you've ever been on a coral reef, there are different colors of coral: reds, pinks, greens, blues, grays, blacks. And I saw a fish that would swim across a 15 section of multicolor coral reef. And as fast as that fish could swim, its body was changing colors from green to blue to black to yellow to orange to white. Whatever background was behind it, these fish, they didn't have to think about it. It's an instinct, not a higher order process, but they changed color. And it was happening so fast that if you could keep your eye on the fish, and they were midway between a gray colored coral and a blue colored coral, you could literally see the color of their skin changing as they passed into the blue color coral from the gray color coral, because it was like a shadow going down or up their body as they swam by it. That's how quickly their colors changed, so they could blend in with their environment. If a fish can do that, a flesh and blood fish can do that, why can't Bigfoot do that? Why does it have to be about switching dimensions or a cloak shield? Maybe they can just naturally do that with their hair, like that fish did that with its skin. That wasn't a paranormal fish or an interdimensional fish, as best as I could tell. For all I know, they could have swam off into another dimension and never seen them again. But this happens in Mother Nature. So before we're ruling out, I'm not saying, or before we're ruling in interdimensional, intradimensional, spiritual, paranormal explanations, before we rule those in as a theory, or more correctly as a hypothesis, we've got to rule out Mother Nature's skills and abilities that other creatures have. Because if Melba Ketchum's study is accurate, and she found gene splicing in her DNA study, I believe it was a triple helix structure in between two double human helix structures. She found a triple helix structure and interpreted that to be evidence of gene splicing. Now, think about that. How long has Bigfoot been around? How many thousands of years? You're a flesh and blooder? Who was doing gene slicing back in the 1800s, the 1400s? Medical technology didn't advance that far. And yet here, possibly Bigfoot has gene splicing done. That came out, I discovered that in Scott Carpenter's book. And that just fascinated the hell out of me, even more so than the theory of a hybrid with human and unknown species DNA. The fact that this creature, who quite a few people think is flesh and blood, has spliced genes in its body. How does that happen? How does that happen? One way for it to happen, I got so consumed with it, I actually, of course, I first came up with their government invention using gene splicing to create that super soldier. So maybe it was government intervention. If you're into UFOs, if you believe that what we perceive as God is a superior race of beings that have come down to our little test tube called Earth and manipulated us and added to our DNA and takes care of us, you'd think it was the aliens that did the gene splicing. I called Scott Carpenter up and asked him how he explains the gene splicing. Can anybody guess my answer? Well, hell, I believe God did it. And certainly that's a possibility. God can do anything. Why not gene splicing? Although we're just working with pigs and mice and I think sheep with gene splicing, at least publicly. God only knows what they're doing with black ops science. Mother Nature's explanations dismiss any number, well, I'm sorry, the theories that people come up with out of their own belief systems dismiss any number of established possibilities known to occur in the nature's world. Chameleons, moths, camouflage. I just finished discussing all that. So before we start ruling in other dimensions, we need to rule out Mother Nature and her wonders, or God and his wonders, or a combination thereof. Or if God's an extraterrestrial, maybe UFO, or, again, we bring our own baggage to how we perceive things, and that's going to affect what we believe. This line of thinking does not in any way preclude genuine woo experiences, paranormal experiences, religious experiences. I'm not saying those things can't happen. I'm saying before we can prove scientifically they're happening, we need to rule out more common, parsimonious, and explanatory events and factors. It's called Occam's razor. Occam's razor, the law of parsimony. Again, what we do, our perception, Bigfoot disappeared. I blinked my eyes and Bigfoot was gone. And that I've had people that happen to. I'm not saying they're BSing, that they blinked their eyes and the Bigfoot was gone. But we can't, before we say that happened because they slipped into another dimension, we have to rule out they're good blending with the night or camouflaging. And if they're blending with the night and camouflaging, you can't just say that they change their vibratory patterns. Although that may be involved in changing color for all I know. But again, we got to take examples from Mother Nature, especially if there's been gene splicing. Maybe they took that gene from that fish that changed in different parts of its body, changed colors to match the coral that it was swimming with, and it was the background behind them. Maybe they took the gene that does that from a fish and put it into Bigfoot. And maybe Bigfoot can just naturally, flesh and blood, camouflage, just like that fish. It's flesh and blood, but it was sure camouflaging well. We've got to start developing theories to stop developing theories that confirm our pre-existing ideas and biases, especially given that we're calling them theories without formally testing hypotheses in a systematic fashion. Again, I mentioned I've got an experiment for mind speak. Just because we can't see that mind speak, just because a lot of us can't hear it or get that impression, it doesn't exist. No way. If you can't see it, it's not happening. If you can't touch it or feel it, it's not real. You've heard me say it once, and I'll say it again. Where would medical science be if that was the scientific attitude adapted in the Dark Ages, where everything was treated by leeches? Oh, he needs a good leeching. The barber's coming into town this week. We'll be sure to get you a good leeching to heal that rotting flesh. No. That rotting flesh is because of germs. We've got to treat the germs and keep the clean as possible and as germ-free. Well, what's this germ? I don't see any germs on this thing. Do you see them, or are they crawling around them now? Point one out to me. No, you can't see them under a mic unless you got them. Oh, it's a microscope. I don't know. If I can't see it, I'm not going to believe in it, and I'm sure as heck not going to pay you, barber, to treat me for something I can't see. Where would medical science be today if somebody hadn't discovered a microscope to see things that can't be perceived or things that can't be seen? It's a sensory process to the human eye or heard to the human ear. Dog whistles. Dogs hear them clear as day because the frequency of sound that they can hear is higher than ours. That sound's going off, but our hearing is such of a primitive level compared to dogs. Not necessarily primitive. It's so restricted in range compared to dogs for high-end range. We can't hear it, but it hurts the dog's ears. So we gotta, and same with confabulation, same with infrasound. Is that a false memory, or did it really happen that way? Did you really get sick because Bigfoot was sending you infrasound and puke and get all tingly? Is that the infrasound doing that to you? Or did you do that to your own nervous system when he popped up from behind a tree standing right in front of you? Was that the Bigfoot sending out that infrasound doing that? Or was that your fight-flight response kicking in because of your anxiety and fear making you sick? We can test that experiment right now. Well, not right now, as in right this second. But we can test that experiment very readily. And it could be done in a laboratory without a Bigfoot, because we've got plenty of Bigfoot recordings that have identified the infrasound being put out by Bigfoot on a spectrometer, an audio spectrometer that measures the frequency of certain pitches and tones. Bigfoot, I think we're getting pretty close to having that Bigfoot signature of sound. Just like a wolf has a different sound signature than a coyote, than a dog. I think audio offers a lot of strengths for scientific research. Confabulation, filling in that memory. Was it so traumatizing, the event so traumatizing and fear-producing to you that you created that blank in your memory because you got overly stressed? Or was it Bigfoot's brain or body sending out that electromagnetic field or that infrasound sound wave that literally destroys brain cells or somehow impacts the memory centers of your brain? What's the cause and what's the effect? How much are we the cause of these experiences ourselves versus Bigfoot being the outward source that's creating that event in our own nervous system? Pretty fine hair to split, but we can split it right now. If you have enough money, I've laid out how to do that study in my book, how to differentiate whether we're creating that fight flight in ourselves through our fear, or is Bigfoot triggering that automatic instinctual fight flight reaction through their infrasound in us? We can answer that question with enough money in a year or two. Moving on to the D's. Cognitive dissonance. And this is a biggie. This is another very important vocabulary term to remember, because cognitive dissonance happens in our lives every day. And if you've ever seen a Bigfoot, buddy, I can only imagine that you experienced some cognitive dissonance when you saw this creature in front of you that's not supposed to exist. That's just a fairy tale. That's just a legend. And it's 30 feet from you and you're watching it eat. What's going on? This isn't supposed to be happening. It's an unpleasant psychological state resulting from inconsistencies between two or more elements in the cognitive system. So there's an inconsistency in your mind. It should be this way, but it's this way. I don't understand why it's this way, so let me think about that and figure that out. That uneasiness, that unsteadiness, that's called dissonance. If dissonance hangs out, it's going to be called anxiety. And when you get that physical anxiety reaction and there's really something threatening your life or making you anxious, then we call that fear. So dissonance is presumed to involve a state of heightened arousal and to have characteristics similar to physiologic drives. Something that seems automatic almost, hardwired like hunger. Thus, that imbalance or that uncertainty involved in cognitive dissonance creates a motivational drive for an individual to restore its sense of equilibrium, to answer that question, to understand what just happened. Our brains move us in that direction. It's unsettling to have memory loss. It's unsettling to feel imbalance or out of touch or out of key or out of rhythm. The human nervous system, the human mind likes consistency and cohesiveness. And we strive for that when two facts we can't reconcile or two ideas we can't reconcile in our brain. That causes cognitive dissonance. Our dissonant psyche drives us forward to answer these questions. This is potentially problematic as a form of bias, because oftentimes the answers that our brain comes up with for us is an accurate generation or perception or answer, but because we process our world through perception, if we could just get rid of our brain so we didn't have to perceive anything, we could be objective all the time. But everything in our world, everything in our mind is processed through perception, which is influenced by our thinking, our learning, our lives, our parenting, our breathing, our dreaming, our sleeping goes into perception. And that's why we're likely to be biased in our perceptions. And that's why no two people see the same thing in the same way. And that's why psychotherapists make a lot of money, to try and find that common ground between two people that are experiencing the same thing but are perceiving it in two different ways. That's perception. I've already discussed that this one. So dissonance in Bigfoot. You're driving all the way up there, 2-hour drive to get to the campsite, the expedition site. Thinking about Bigfoot, got Bigfoot on your brain, getting excited to see one. You're ready. If a Bigfoot pops out in front of you, you're not going to freak out. You're not going to fight or flee because you know Bigfoot exists. However, dissonance is consistently invoked, experienced, and resolved even in Class B sightings. Be that resolution accurate or inaccurate. Craig, our story's coming up, buddy. How often have you been in a Bigfoot group? What was that you just saw? What was that sound? Was that a nut falling through a tree? Or was that a nut being thrown at me? Did you hear those bipedal footsteps behind us? Is there a Bigfoot behind us? Or is that a squirrel or a chipmunk hopping through the leaves in a way that sounds like a bipedal footstep? We come up when we hear something that could be Bigfoot related, and you're following a pretty good BFRO advice to debunk it. Try and attribute it to something in the environment or Mother Nature before you ever start thinking about it being a Bigfoot phenomenon. You got to rule out the obvious before you attribute it to the unobvious or unnatural or supernatural. And that process that drives us to figure out what that is that dissonance. And if your dissonance gets so strong that you can't stand it, your brain's going to come up with a resolution to that, whether you want it to or not. And that's called confabulation, which we defined earlier. Coming up on 2 hours. Where's my clock? 1 hour and 52 minutes. Let's see, what do I got left here? Incredulity bias, organismic perceptual bias, scientific method. Oh, I wanted to get to the scientific method. If there's one piece of vocabulary we need to know, it's what the psychological scientific method is, or what the scientific method is. So since I'm coming up on 2 hours and I got more slides, how many more slides I got? I'm on slide 33, and my slideshow goes to 53 and past. So we're going to wrap it up at about the 2 hour mark here, folks. I could probably chat on for another hour, but it's now 1:02 in the morning. Got one more full day to prepare for my filming for Legend Meets Science. So I'm going to wrap it up and get to bed about 2 or 3 o'clock, I guess, at this point in the morning. So we'll pick up with this in an upcoming show after next Monday's show. And until then, I hope I've provoked some interesting thinking in you. Hopefully inspired you to think out of the box a little bit more. Don't take things for granted. Don't jump to a theory before you've tested a hypothesis. Don't form your theory before you formed your hypothesis and tested it. These are important words in science. We're going to have to sooner or later start speaking the language of science. And that's going to involve the scientific model. Hypothesis testing before you call something a theory. Theory testing after you call it a theory to make sure it's a theory before you call it a law. And then continuing to test that law so that you know it's an invariable finding. The earth spins on its axis. The laws of gravity depend on that theory or that law, which we believed was a law, but it's based on not a flat earth theory, it's based on a round earth spinning theory. So we're finding laws even here today that are being questioned and challenged as laws because there's a large group and growing group of people who believe that the earth is flat, or maybe not flat, but spherical, much more spherical than we believe it to be. It's not spinning around. So what we thought was a law of gravity, if the flat earthers are correct, what are we going to do with that law of gravity? Because that whole law of gravity that things have been falling out of the sky because of for all of our lives, if it's a flat earth, there's going to be another theory explaining gravity. So even laws is the point. Even laws need to be continued to be challenged and retested and reconfirmed. So what are you doing calling your theory a hypothesis when you've never done your hypothesis testing? Think about that. Keep an open mind. Keep your boots on the ground. And keep your heart with your higher power. I sure do hope you have a great evening, folks. Good night.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby, has the feeling passed? Falling in was easy. How do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy. How can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true.
Wanna do it all with you by my side. If you're